Hi everybody, welcome to Theology. I am Zoe and today we are drinking tea and talking theology as we normally do. We are drinking the Jane Austen Blend, which is a blend of 3 different fine Chinese teas. I wasn't able to find the origins of those teas, but it's a blend of 3 different Chinese teas. And this is expected to be the tea that was most commonly had in her time period in which she was working and in that sort of Regency era. This is a tenuous connection to today's topic, as most of them are, but I am aware. This tea is based on something old. Jane Austen's literature and writing are considered to be old and they're considered to be classics. They're in the public domain for most of us today. And the prophecies in Jesus' time, which is the topic of today's video, were also old when he was born, as in the prophecies had been given a while ago. But both had continued to be read and thought about in and up to their current days, with Jane Austen's books still being read today and the prophecies in Jesus' time still being read when he was around, and still today really we read a lot of them with the Old Testament. However, that is where the connection ends. While I do love Jane Austen's work, that's why I have her tea. I like the Bible a lot more, so we'll be focusing on that today. The gap between Micah and Matthew is about 400 years, which is quite a long time, longer than the gap between us and Jane Austen. And most of the last books in the Old Testament are the prophets and are prophetic books, and is particularly written about the Israelites being in exile. Jesus, throughout the Old Testament, is and was intensely prophesied, because there are so many prophecies about the Messiah and about a Saviour coming, and these prophecies talk about his birth, his death, and his resurrection. The nature and number of these prophecies are particularly interesting. In his lifetime, he fulfilled over 300 prophecies that have been prophesied, predicted in the Old Testament literature, and these can all be proven to be real, not like Jesus was around and then they were written retroactively and given through things like the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you want to know more about the verification of this, I will leave some links down below to some of the archaeological and historical research that has been done. And so when looking at these prophecies, I found many of them, as other people have found as well, were not things that he had control over. Like, there are some prophecies about what he would say, and if you know what they are, then you can be like, oh well, of course he said that because he knew he was meant to say that if he wanted people to do this. But there are a significant number of those prophecies that are also about his place of birth, who his parents were, what happened when he was a baby, how people would respond to him. Isn't something that you can really control. You can't control who your parents are, really. You can't control what happens when you're a baby. You can't control where you're born. You can't control what other people think of you, as much as we like to pretend we can. So that just kind of adds to the absolute amazement for me that all of these 300 prophecies were fulfilled in Jesus. Like, even the Israelites and Jews at the time didn't necessarily think. There was a lot of debate about whether this would be one person or multiple people. They thought one would be like a king and one would be a slave or a servant, because how could you have a king that was a servant? But this is exactly what Jesus managed to do. He managed to be a king and a servant at the same time. But then you add in the maths and the probabilities. Some people who are much, much better at statistics than I am ran and calculated the probabilities of Jesus just filling 8 of the prophecies that are in the Old Testament in his lifetime, and it came out as a chance of 1 in 10 to the 17, which is the this number here. It's a huge number. Which means it's a very, very unlikely thing to happen by chance. And then if you go fulfilling 48, it goes to 1 in 10 to the 157, which is this many zeros. These are huge numbers. There's a lot to get your head around, and honestly I find this absolutely insane. I don't understand a lot of stats. I don't particularly enjoy stats either. When you go, okay, that's just 48, he fulfilled 300. The chances of that feel like incomprehensible to me. Honestly, I find the 10 to 157 already hard to get my head around. And basically what this means are the chances of this happening are vanishingly small, incredibly unlikely. And now there's no way we're talking about the prophecies of Jesus, and there is no way I'm going to be able to cover most of these today. I'm barely going to even be able to scratch the surface. So I've decided to really narrow my focus as we get closer to Christmas, talking a bit more about things related to Christmas, because that's one of the big points in the Christian calendar. We're going to be talking about some of the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled in his birth and young childhood. Honestly, the prophecies around his birth and his birth overall don't really mean anything without his subsequent resurrection, because that is the point in the story that everything is building to. The first one we're going to be talking about is Bethlehem. The prophecy here comes from Micah 5:2, which says, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah," I might have said that wrong, "who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be a ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from the ancient days." So this was considered a prophecy of the Messiah before Jesus was born. It was agreed upon and well understood to be that way. And the book of Micah, in this prophecy, is dated to end up being around 700 years before Jesus was born, so quite a while. They spent a long time waiting to see this prophecy fulfilled. So how did Jesus fulfill this prophecy? How was this prophecy fulfilled in his birth? He was born in Bethlehem, as recorded in Luke and Matthew. And in the next part, he is coming forth from the old of ancient of days. This is a term people would use to refer to Yahweh, to refer to God, is talking about him being ancient of days, so being the oldest of old. Jesus, who is holy God and holy man, which is a whole other thing that we'll probably explore at another time, is therefore eternal. And this idea is emphasized in the beginning of John as well, with Jesus being the Word at the beginning of time. In the beginning there was the Word, which is John 1:1. And then the third one is Jesus was not only declared a ruler by himself, he didn't actually really walk around calling himself the king. But on the cross, he was put up with the sign that said King of the Jews, and as people grew to understand Jesus more, especially after his resurrection, he was seen a bit more as a king, and this is talked about a lot in Paul's letters, so the latter half of the New Testament. The second prophecy that we're going to be talking about, so number 2, is the virgin birth, which is prophesied in Isaiah 7:14. The set of prophecies in Isaiah 7, a lot of prophecies are really hard to get your head around because often they talk about a lot of things at once. It's figuring out what are the prophecies that only Jesus could fulfill, or what are fulfilled by other people that also point to Jesus, which is a different thing. Anyway, the whole prophecy that's given in Isaiah 7 is one that is still a lot of debate around in academic theological circles. But Isaiah 7:14 is commonly thought of and talked about as being the prophecy of Mary and the virgin birth. And verse is, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And this is also one of the things I'm pretty sure that the angel tells to Mary when she's being told about what's going on, and she's able to accept that offer that God is placing. Since we're just looking at how Jesus fulfilled specific prophecies, I'm going to be focusing on that. I'm not going to be digging into the controversy around Isaiah 7 today. Maybe another time. So the word virgin here is one that is particularly important, and it refers specifically to it being a young woman of marriageable age who is not yet married. So that's to do with the translations and the language and the specific language that it was written in the Hebrew, but also the interpretation of what virgin meant, because it was assumed that if she was a young woman of marriageable age who is not yet married, she would be a virgin because the culture at the time. And this is exactly what Mary was. She was able to get married. She was betrothed, so engaged to Joseph, but they were not yet married at that point. And it's quite an interesting thing that I think gets talked about in Matthew and Luke about Joseph's reaction and processing of finding out what's going on and how he processes it and what that means for him. So Jesus is fulfilled in this prophecy through immaculate conception, divine conception. This is outlined in Matthew and Luke as well, that it is God's Spirit which impregnates Mary. And she says, yes, when God says, this is my plan, she willingly partakes in that. And the second part, the name as well, which is call his name Emmanuel, is more than just him being called Emmanuel. This is something that some people poke holes in and go, oh, but you call him Jesus Christ, you call him Jesus, but he should be called Emmanuel. Why this? What Emmanuel means is God with us. So you will call him God with us, which is what he does get identified as. He gets identified as being an incarnation of God. He gets identified as being God with us. And so it is more an example of his character, a manifestation of his attributes, that Jesus is literally God with us. Otherwise, why would he be named Jesus? Why would he get called that? That is what he was called. My name is Zoe, but people don't only call me Zoe. They call me other things and refer to me by other names and roles that I have, and that is identities and things that people call me and call out in me. So it's really to do with the use of language and understanding of call that this is really actually fulfilled, because Jesus is called God with us. He is referred to as Emmanuel, and it is more than just a name. It is a title in many ways. A third prophecy that we are talking about is in Hosea, which talks about Egypt, and it's in Hosea 11:1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Now this prophecy is not a prophecy in the same way as the others, because how it was interpreted at the time was, when Israel was a child, I loved him. So when it was a new nation, way back in Exodus, I loved him. So back when Israel was new being formed, out of Egypt, out of the place that they were in exile. That's the whole story in Genesis and Exodus that a lot of the Jewish faith is built upon, and rightly so. It's an incredible story of redemption. And so a lot of this was interpreted at the time as something that was referring back. But it is a prophecy that is referred to as being filled in the book of Matthew. But it's not as clear for the people in the time or Hosea that it was explicitly about the Messiah. It is about both. It is about what happened in the past and what is happening in the future. It was believed only to be referring back to Exodus, the Old Covenant, and not also to the Messiah and to the New Covenant, which is also talked about in Jeremiah. But it is fulfilled. It is something that happens. When Jesus was a child, God loved him. And when Israel was a child, God loved him. God loved Israel. And it's fulfilled through Jesus's family fleeing Egypt to escape Herod, which is something that the 3 wise men who visit Jesus tell him, I'm pretty sure. But the family flee Egypt to escape Herod because he is killing all of the sons born in this particular time period because he heard that there was a new king coming. He didn't want to lose his role as the king. It is an example of how things can be true at the moment, but also prophetic. You know, it's an example of how things can be now as they are, but also talking about something that is bigger than what's just happening now, something else that is going to happen that we don't even realize because we don't know the future. He is then called out of Egypt. His family moves back from Egypt to the Nazareth region, which is why he's called Jesus of Nazareth. When he's a bit older and no longer out of danger, when Mary and Joseph are told it is the right time by God. So out of Egypt, he literally called his son. Jesus is literally God the Father. Jesus is the Son. I would recommend you just Googling the prophecies fulfilled by Jesus's birth, or really any other aspects of his life, really Googling those prophecies. And there are a lot of really interesting things that get talked about, especially when looking at his lineage, which is a huge topic. And there are so many small, uncontrollable variables, especially by Jesus himself. You can't control your whole life. And unless he was God, unless he was specifically placed where he was, there are even more prophecies, many of which he had no control over, with his people's response and his death. And I've linked down below a website that outlines all, if not most, of the prophecies and what he has and how they're fulfilled and where they're fulfilled. If you have any thoughts or any other interesting little facts and stuff, please comment them down below. I always love hearing what other people have to say. And subscribe and join us next week where we'll be drinking some more tea and look into some more theology. Thank you for watching.